Hey there, today we are celebrating Christmas in July and I am bringing you some of the best look for less Christmas dupes. Shannon of the Cozy Christmas Cottage is hosting this once again this year, and she has a roundup of many talented DIYers sharing their Christmas in July themes just for you. I will have a link of the playlist so that you can check out all of the other creators, and now let's start on those Christmas DIYs. The first piece of decor that I'm going to be recreating is this pine cone wreath from Serena and Lily. It's on sale for $199, but even it being on sale, it's still really expensive. The first thing I'm going to need is a wreath form, and I picked this one up at my local Dollar Tree for $1.25. You can always use larger or smaller ones depending on what you want to make for this. And then I also picked these pine cones up from the craft section at Hobby Lobby. These were from last year when everything went on sale, and I know I picked these up for half off. You're going to need 2 of these bags. Then I picked this up, and if you guys don't have one of these, this is so convenient for crafting, putting your paint down, or even holding your glue gun and it catches all the drips. So I thought I'd share this little tray and how handy it can be, and you'll see me use it later on in the video. Now, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to paint the entire wreath form in some brown acrylic paint. This way, when I glue the pine cones onto the wreath form, if there are any little areas that I happen to miss or not be able to cover completely, you will not see any green shine through. Once the paint is completely dry, you're going to begin to hot glue your pine cones onto the entire front surface of your wreath. Just place a small amount of hot glue and then hold each pine cone down for a few seconds until it dries and stays on the wreath. Try to get these pine cones as closely and tightly as possible to each other so that it looks as full and nice as possible. Make sure you try to reach the back as much as possible without going to the back of the wreath so that wherever you hang it or set it down, it lays flat. Next, you're going to need to make a bow, and I found this ribbon at Dollar Tree for only $3, and it had a nice velvety texture just like the one from the inspiration, so I decided to go ahead and use this green one. Of course, you can always use any color that you want. I usually take 2 pieces of ribbon and lay them down over themselves to create the 2 top bow sections, one a little bit smaller than the other, and then I lay the smaller one on top. I cut those individual pieces together, and then I kind of cinch the center, and using some string or jute or twine, whatever you have, tie the center together to hold that bow in place. I fluff up both ends of the bow, and then I take a separate piece of ribbon and I use that for the center and the little legs that kind of just hang down. I wrap it around the center of the bow, and using hot glue, I hold everything in place. The last thing I did was cut a little bit of that same ribbon and put it on the back of it in order to create a little loop so that I can hang my wreath. And here is how it turned out. And I always like to share a side-by-side comparison of what the original is versus mine, as well as the savings. This one is actually on a smaller scale, and if you wish to create a larger one, you can. It'll cost a little bit more, but it will still be a great savings. We're going to be attempting to recreate these faux potted berry cluster cone trees. Say that 5 times fast. They're pretty large, and the smaller one is $79 when the larger one comes in at $159. Now, the perfect thing to use to recreate these would be these metal cages that have been found at the Dollar Tree garden section. I had 3 over the summer, but I was not able to find any this time around for these DIYs. So if you're unsuccessful in finding these like I was, the next best thing are these right here that you can get right now. Now, if you were making the larger ones, I would suggest using the larger metal buckets that they have at Dollar Tree, but since these are smaller, I am using these that you can find at the party section. And finally, you will need a ton of these. Now, I did notice this year, these only come with 4 sprigs on them when they used to come with 5, and now they're $1.25, so you're actually paying more for less berries. So just keep that in mind when you do this and consider your costs. Now, the first thing you want to do is remove all of the tinsel that goes around each of these trees, and it's actually quite simple. I wanted to make one of them taller than the other, just like in the original inspiration, and since I have limited supplies, I had to get really creative. So what I did was I melted 2 ends of half a stick of hot glue, and I put that in between 2 of them to give the illusion that one of them was taller than the other. Then with some wire cutters, I began to cut off the little heads of the berry bundles so that I can start placing them on the cones. Now, before I adhered any of the berries in, I wanted to give it a little bit more surface area so that the berries would adhere. So what I did was I took some yarn that I actually had purchased for another DIY that you'll see soon, and I began wrapping it around all of the little teeth that were already on the cone. It held it in place very well, and this will just give me more surface area so that the berries have something to adhere to when I glue them on. As I began adding berries to the tree forms, I started at the top and worked my way down. I cut the berry little bundles down into smaller ones and adhered them that way. I continued all the way to the bottom, and then after I was done adding the main berries, I would come back in and check if I had any areas that needed to be filled in. Then I took some paint in Santa Red. This is some old paint that I've had on hand, and I decided to paint all of the berries because not all the berries are the same color, and sometimes you can see the styrofoam from when you cut them from the previous bushes. So I decided I wanted to cover all of those white spots off and give it a more consistent look, so I painted the entire thing. I also wanted the berries to look a little bit more shiny, so I had some Mod Podge on hand as well in glossy, and I gave everything a nice coat. I wasn't perfect with this, but it did give a nice sheen throughout. Once it was dry, all you needed to do was adhere them onto the buckets, or you could leave them without. Honestly, I like them without the buckets myself. So let's see how we did. Because these were much smaller than the ones I had online, I went ahead and priced out 2 of the smaller ones for the original Pottery Barn ones. So if I would have bought 2 of the smaller ones, it would have come out to $158 compared to mine. For the berries, the tree forms, and the buckets, I paid $34 for 2 of them. Alright, so I don't know about you, but I have a tough time deciding on tree toppers because I don't like any of them. And sometimes I don't even put any of them on my trees. I'm guilty of that. But I did see this one on Ballard Design's website and I absolutely fell in love. And of course, even on sale for $79, it was still too much. But I knew exactly where to go to get exactly what I needed to recreate this look. So off to my local Dollar Tree I went and I found me one of these little cones. And you've seen these around, they come around every single year. And I picked up two of these mirrors from their home decor section. Now this one's going to be super easy and super quick. I mean, they're already gold, so there's no painting involved. So the first thing we're going to do is unwrap this Christmas tree because we need the frame that's underneath. This is what you're going to end up with, and the best part is that it's already dark green, so it's going to blend in nicely with all of those pine needles. You're also going to have to cut it down because you do want it to fit inside of that mirror, and I'll show you what I mean. Now you're going to want to place it on top of your sunburst mirror. However, here I can see that it's not going to fit quite yet, so I'm cutting it down a little bit more, trying to get it as close as possible to the end of the inside of one of the starbursts, as you can see right here. I want it to lay just inside the top as well as the bottom. So I'm cutting off those end pieces, and what I'll end up with is four little pegs on that bottom little section, and that is the perfect length. And next you want to take a good amount of hot glue and you want to glue this onto the inside of that starburst. And I apologize for my camera. For some reason, it kept going in and out of focus in a couple of these sections, and I had no idea until after I saw the footage. But as you can see here, I am laying it inside of the starburst and I'm adding a ton of hot glue. Now, if you want to add a little bit of E6000 in order to make it a little bit of a stronger hold, you are welcome to do so. Now, the original tree topper was only one-sided, but I wanted mine to be double-sided. So if it's in like a center of a room and you want to see your tree from behind, you have a sunburst on both sides. Plus, it was really easy to put together as well as inexpensive, and it worked so well. Now, I did hold it for a bit while it was drying, and I kept adding hot glue where I thought I would need a little bit more support, and I just was patient with it and let it dry and become sturdy. And here is how it turned out. All right, here is how we did. The original cost $79.20 and mine only cost $3.75 because I only use 3 items from Dollar Tree. And what's even better is that mine is two-sided. This was so easy and I love how it turned out. We're going to be recreating these red candy striped ribbon votives, and you won't believe how easy these are to make and how inexpensively you can do it. So I went to my local Goodwill and I found two of the perfect vases for only $1.09 a piece. The first thing I did was remove all of the stickers and clean them thoroughly, making sure there was no residue. Then I came back in with painter's tape and began to create my ribbon that swirls around each one. Next, I took some of that same Santa red that I had used earlier and I wanted it to kind of look like a stained glass, and I decided to mix it with Mod Podge. Now it worked in some areas, but it seized up on me in others and I got a couple of clumps in thicker areas. So I'm not sure if it was because maybe the mediums were a little older and I've just had them for a while, or if I just made them too thick. Either way, it still worked out. Now you don't want this to dry completely before you remove the tape. So what I did was I paint one, let it sit while I paint the other one. Then once I was done painting the other one, I would remove the previous one's tape. That way it wouldn't pull on any of the dried paint that was already on the glass and then create just jagged edges and even mess up the paint job. I did have to touch up in a couple of areas, but all you do from here is just let them dry and add a couple of candles and you are done. So let's see how we did. The original pair at Pottery Barn was $69 for both, and with getting these at Goodwill and spending $1.25 on each of the candles, these only cost me $4.68. I saw this faux berry kissing ball, which I'm assuming is the new version of the mistletoe, and I wanted to try it out. Now, I tried this a few years ago on a smaller scale when I created some smaller berry ornaments like this. However, I wanted to try it on a larger ornament to see how nice it would look if I did it in a bigger size. So I got this larger ornament at Dollar Tree, and I picked the red one on purpose so I wouldn't have to paint it if it were like a white styrofoam ball. Now I needed to remove the top little lip that goes underneath the holder to hang it because it needed to be nice and smooth. So my husband found a saw and he was able to cut it off for me. Now I wanted to add the ribbon to the inside of the ornament to hold it up. And I would have actually used a more solid red ribbon, but they didn't have anything at Dollar Tree that did not have any print on it. So I just settled for this see-through one, which still worked. And all I did was hot glue it to the inside like that, and later on I will cover that hole. Now this one's going to be a little bit more tedious because you're going to have to adhere each and every berry individually onto the ornament. And I started at the top rim and I began working my way around and down. And once I get about halfway done, I like to flip it around and maybe put it in a little bucket or a cup and then work my way back up to the other side of the ornament. And enclosing the hole where the ribbon is actually very easy. I would just add one berry at a time, wait till it dries, and I'd add another one until the hole closed completely. And just like I did for the two previous trees, I took some of that Santa red and painted the entire ball so it would not have any of the white styrofoam showing. Once that was dry, I'd come back in with the glossy Mod Podge and I'd give it one full coat. And that was it for this DIY. Now let's see how we did. For the original Pottery Barn, the larger one of these was $69, and I based it upon that since mine was a larger one as well. So mine with 4 bushes almost, because I did use a little over 3, and the ribbon and the ornament, it cost me only $7.50 to recreate this. The next thing I saw at the Pottery Barn website that I really loved were these wooden nutcrackers. I'm not really a nutcracker fan because I'm not a fan of all of the different colorful ones, but these that were nice and wood and simple were perfect. The smaller one costs $59 while the larger one costs $79. However, I came across these unfinished wood nutcrackers at the local Dollar Tree in the higher price section, and these are going for only $3 a piece. And for this, I am going really simple. I am using some leftover old brown acrylic paint that I had on hand and adding some water to water it down to create a stain. But you are welcome to use any kind of stain that you already have on hand. Or you can even brew some coffee and you can use that. And now you will find that because it's unfinished wood, it might soak up the stain and it might look a lot lighter once it dries. So what I did is I actually waited till it dried and gave it another coat to deepen the stain. And that worked pretty well. I could have done it a third time if I wanted it darker too. After that, all you have to do is let it dry and enjoy. So let's see how we did. Because mine were slightly smaller than the ones that were at Pottery Barn, I went ahead and priced two of the smaller ones. That still came at $118 versus mine, which only cost me $6 because I had a little bit of leftover brown paint and I used water for the stain. For this next DIY, I'm going to be recreating this crocheted striped ornament that I happened to find on Pottery Barn's website while on my phone, and they go for $9.50 a piece. We're not going to crochet, but I did find this yarn at Dollar Tree, and I got this cream colored one as well as this red one, and then I got two of the plastic larger sized clear ornaments. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to remove the little top off the ornament, and we're going to begin to wrap the cream colored yarn around the ornament. Now you're going to have to be very careful here that you don't go over the yarn itself, because then your stripes won't come down the ornament in an even pattern. So add little itty bitty bits of glue as you go throughout different spots so that when you lay your yarn, it actually stays in place. And of course, once you're done with your first stripe, you cut the yarn and then begin to add your second color, in this case the red. And then I continue to do this with the rest of the ornament. Now, after reaching the midway point, I like to stop on a full stripe and then flip it over and start from the bottom and work my way towards the inside of the ornament. And the reason I do this is because once your ornament starts coming down and under, the ribbon will want to come down as well, if that makes sense, and it starts slipping and it won't stay in place. So if you flip it and work it from the more narrow side to the wider side, it tends to stay in place much better. Now, because I didn't have my wood bead stash and I couldn't find any at the Dollar Tree, I decided to go ahead and wrap the yarn around the little top to the ornament. That way it wouldn't be so loud with it being silver. The last thing to do was to add a ribbon, and I used some of that ribbon that I had used in my earlier DIY. And that was it for this dupe. So let's see how we did. The original cost $9.50, and with the 2 yarns and 2 ornaments, I was able to spend only $5, and that made each ornament only $2.50. You guys know I love wreath making, and this one that I saw on Pottery Barn's website really caught my eye. The large one of these is $149. So I thought I would take up the challenge and see if I can recreate it for much less. The first thing I did was pick up a grapevine wreath, and this one I picked up at Walmart, and I believe it was just under $5. This is the smaller one of the ones that they have in the craft section at Walmart. This one is the 12-inch size. Now, I also picked up these berry bushes from a Dollar Tree. They carry them every year. And as you saw already, I cut them up, making each stem one individual pick so that I can insert it around the wreath, as you can see, all the way around. And I left these stems pretty long, and I also spaced them out evenly before hot gluing them down, just so I knew exactly where I would place them. Now, keeping these stems long will actually create a much larger wreath if you do it this way, so you can get away with getting a smaller, more inexpensive grapevine wreath if you do this. Now, after you do your very first round of berries all around the perimeter, you're going to take your next set of berry picks and you're going to go around and do it in the center and kind of bring those berries in a little bit. You also want to insert them in between the picks that you have already put in your wreath. That way it starts filling in those spaces in between each pick, making the wreath fuller. after you do that second row, you're going to go in and do your third row. And just like you did before, you're going to focus on putting those berries in between the second row berries. That way you fill in those spaces. Now you want these stems to be a little bit smaller so that you can get these a little bit more tight inside of the center of the wreath. Now, the original wreath had lots of different types of greenery, and I wasn't about to go all out and get different greenery specific to Christmas. I just basically looked in my stash and I found some of this greenery that was left over from my summer wreath that I had on my front door that I did earlier this year. So I just decided to go ahead and cut those up and start inserting them throughout. So again, another way you can save money is just by using whatever you have on hand, and it doesn't necessarily need to be greenery like pine needles for Christmas because your berries are already the festive, big, bright statement piece in your wreath. Everything else can just be supporting greenery. Now, the most important part here is to take that greenery and insert it in all of the areas that need a little bit more filler, and any gaps that you see, that's exactly where you want to place it. That way the wreath looks nice and full and of course have that high-end look. Now, after I started adding my greenery, I decided to go ahead and use the rest of my berry bushes. I ended up using a total of 14. And then finally, and just because I found them in my stash, I had these fern stems that I decided to go ahead and place them in there. And then right before I was about to wrap up, I did find some pine cones that I had left over from my fall decor, and I decided to go ahead and use those instead because of course they are still festive for the season, and the original also had some pine cones in it. Now this step here is optional, however I do think it's what takes the wreath to the next level. If you've ever used any of these berries from Dollar Tree, you know that they tend to pop off and you get a lot of white foam poking through. So in order to hide all of that, I took some simple red paint and just began touching up those areas where the foam was exposed. All I did was go around the entire wreath looking at different angles so I can spot the different little areas that needed to be touched up, and that was it. Now let's see how this wreath turned out. Alright, so let's see how we did. The original wreath was $149, and even though it's a little bit bigger than mine did end up being about 2 feet wide, which is a good size wreath. The only thing I had to pay for was the grapevine wreath form and the berries. Everything else I had on hand. So I only ended up spending $22.50 recreating this look. Now these are called ornament fillers on Ballard Design's website, but they look like ornaments to me and they can totally function as it. Now I love the beautiful white with the gold peeking through the surface, but at $15 each, it was a little bit of a stretch. And honestly, all you need is some very inexpensive ornaments or some leftover ornaments in your stash that you wish to update. I found this box for $3 at my local dollar store, so I decided to have some fun. And for this, I'm just going to use some inexpensive Waverly chalk paint from Walmart. And I am just going to paint them all over. This paint covers pretty well, but I did give it 2 coats to make sure I covered the gold. And I did try this on 2 different kinds of ornaments, just because I wanted to see how it worked out with these different patterns. Now, what you do need to keep in mind in order to do this, you will need ornaments that have raised surface patterns like this. Now I let those dry completely before I move to the next step. And what's funny is that I thought I was going to be able to go over this with like a damp cloth and remove the white paint to expose the original gold color underneath. However, this paint was not moving. It was not budging. It stuck onto those ornaments and did not want to come off. So the next best thing was to use Rub and Buff, and I just put some on my finger and lightly rubbed it all over the surface, focusing on those raised areas so that I can bring out the pattern. Now, you don't have to apply this absolutely perfect. If you do rub some Rub and Buff on other areas of the ornament, know that it is perfectly fine and it will actually give it a more vintage look. Here is how they turned out. All right, let's see how we did. For these ornaments, if I would have only purchased two, I would be paying $30.40. I paid $3 for a box of 8, and while I didn't do the other ones, I still can, and it's less than $3 for 4 of them. And imagine you can do this with any color paint you want and just customize your decor this year by doing this simple step. Now for my final Lacrylis dupe, I'm going to be recreating these Valor Designs flocked glass tabletop trees, and they're a very velvety surface, and they're also have like this little flocking to them slightly, and they range from anywhere between $19 all the way up to $31 a piece. But I figured we can recreate this for so much less. Now, I went to my local Dollar General and I happened to come across these. The tall one is only $5, the medium ones are 3, and the little one is 1. And they actually are very cute looking trees. However, they do look plastic in person. So I decided to use these in order to recreate these trees. And I thought they were just perfect. So I took some red and I just began applying it throughout the entire surface of the large one. Now, this is same Waverly chalk paint, and I do think it does make a difference to use chalk paint in this occasion. And what I'm going to do here, I'm going to give it a couple of coats. As a matter of fact, I think I did 3 coats total. And here you see me applying a second coat. I really didn't want any of that silver to poke through the finish. Now I did let this dry completely after the second coat. I wanted to make sure I had a nice bond on that plastic surface. I did the same thing to the 2 medium ones. And for the medium ones, I decided to go with a nice sage color. I just thought it would be so pretty. This one was a little bit trickier because the surface on these were a little bit more complex, so I had to make sure I got all those nooks and crannies. Now, after the final coat was dry, I came back in and did another wet coat this time. And then on that wet coat, I added baking soda and I put it through like a strainer or a sifter, and I began to kind of just sprinkle it on top, and then any extra that would fall on the table I'd pick back up and sprinkle right over. And you want to make sure you do this while the paint is still wet because you want it to adhere to the paint, and this is going to give you like that velvety textured surface with that little bit of flocking throughout. Now you want to be generous with this, and you just want to get as much surface area as possible covered with that flocking so that you get the most amount of baking soda that adheres. I do, however, give it a few taps before setting it aside. That way I can knock off anything that's too loose on the surface. All right, then it was up to removing the excess baking soda. I did this 2 different ways. For the red one, because I was still trying to figure out how I wanted to do it, I actually did this while the paint was still a little damp. And what I realized is that some of the paint would kind of rub off onto the baking soda bits, and it actually gave it a much better texture than I thought. And I could even reach down with the foam brush and add more to it, and it would stick on a little bit better, in my opinion. For the green ones, I actually waited till it was completely dry before knocking off the excess baking soda. And what I noticed is that sometimes there would be patches where it would look like it didn't really have much baking soda at all. So if I were to do this again, I would have them all be a little bit tacky to the touch while I'm removing the baking soda. Again, I can add on some more at the time because it's still tacky, and for some reason it would just feel better and look better, and I just like the overall finish, so just keep that in mind. Either way, as you can see here in this close-up, you can still feel and see the velvety texture as well as the flocking throughout. So again, either way it's fine, it's just what you prefer in the end. And I just think this gives it such a beautiful texture. Now once you're done removing the baking soda, that's all you have to do. Here is how they turned out. Alright, let's see how we did on this last one. If I would have bought one large, two medium, and one small one of the original, it would have been $96.80. Now, as for me, I only paid $15, and that was for the trees and some red paint as well as some beige paint for the little Christmas tree. Everything else I had on hand. That is a huge savings for the same look. Well, that's it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, please make sure to give this video a like and let me know in the comments below which one of these Look for Less dupes was your favorite. Don't forget to check out everyone else's videos with the playlist link, and I will see you back here very soon with another video. Until then, adios!